As Capcom's first video game, Vulgus, had been wrapping up development, Yoshiki Okamoto's team remained hard at work creating their new action arcade title. Tokuro Fujiwara's shooter had reached the finish line first, most likely because Okamoto's project had gone through some big changes since its initial concept. Originally, it was supposed to be more in line with experiences like Donkey Kong or Fujiwara's Rock and Rope, which were often described as action platformers or character games. But Okamoto's STG roots and love for the genre eventually pushed the title into playing much closer to a horizontal shooter. The project would take heavy inspiration from the famous Chinese novel Journey to the West, with its main character being based on Sun Wukong, one of the leading characters from the renowned story, who was a monkey that possessed supernatural strength and abilities. Sun Wukong's name, when transliterated into Japanese, was pronounced as Son Goku. The game's main protagonist, as well as the game itself, received the name SonSon, obviously inspired by Wukong's Japanese pronunciation, with SonSon being considered Son Goku's grandson instead of the actual character himself. The game began with SonSon's allies being abducted by a Majin, or demon, and the mythical monkey needing to make his way through 19 different stages, each which seamlessly flowed from one to the next, to reach Tenjiku and rescue his captured friends. SonSon's platforming-like mechanic allowed the player to jump vertically back and forth between 6 different rows to avoid hordes of oncoming enemies and collect various point-awarding items. The game also featured a heavy focus on shooting and an auto-scrolling screen, which caused many to classify it as an STG or shoot-'em-up rather than an action platformer. SonSon could fire his magical staff in front of and behind him to defeat both enemies and obstacles, which were often thrown at the player in large droves. At the end of some of the stages, the screen would stop scrolling and a timed challenge area would activate where multiple flashing tablets appeared alongside a group of bomb-hurling enemies. If SonSon destroyed all the tablets within enough time, he'd be rewarded with a special item. This item would be Capcom's signature Yashichi symbol, which was now consciously being included as a branding element for the company, much like Namco's recurring special flag, or S-flag. The Yashichi appeared alongside the screen-clearing POW item, both of which had appeared previously in Vulgus, and would continue to make appearances in many future Capcom games. In SonSon's last few stages, the player received many more opportunities to earn the special Yashichis, as the timed challenge areas would start to pop up more frequently. Often following each challenge area would be a short boss fight against 3 of the Majin, who would fly around hurling axe projectiles at the player until they were defeated. Once reaching the statue of Buddha in Tenjiku, the game's final level, and rescuing SonSon's allies, similar to many other arcade titles at this time, the game would loop back around to the very first stage so that the player could continue on using their same credit while still extending their score. SonSon also included simultaneous cooperative gameplay, where a second player would take control of a pig named Tonton, presumably based on the half-human, half-pig character Shulbajie from Journey to the West. Both SonSon and Tonton played quite similarly and could work alongside each other, shooting and defeating enemies throughout the game's 19 stages. Okamoto had been a huge fan of and took plenty of inspiration from many of Namco's early arcade works when designing his own games, particularly Xevious. To show his appreciation for the game, he included special bamboo shoot items as an Easter egg in SonSon that were designed after Xevious's Soul Towers. The Soul Towers were hidden targets which would appear only if the player bombed a certain area. Much like these towers, SonSon's bamboo shoots were hidden items that only appeared if the player walked on top of them and could be acquired for points. SonSon would release in Japanese arcades 2 months after Vulgus in July of 1984, achieving somewhat favorable success for Capcom, ranking as the 5th most popular arcade game that month in Japan's Game Machines magazine. It would hit North American shores later that same year, with Romstar handling its distribution in the West. SonSon attracted players with both its fun and unique gameplay and its variety of different enemy types and behaviors, but its floatiness when jumping between the 6 horizontal rows made its controls and movements feel a bit stiff for a game rooted in the STG genre. While some may think Dragon Ball, the insanely popular series that pulled heavy inspiration from Journey to the West as well, might have been a big influence on SonSon's development, the beloved manga wouldn't even receive its first chapter until November of 1984, 4 months after SonSon had initially hit arcades in Japan. In February of 1986, roughly a year and a half following the game's arcade debut, subcontractor Micronix ported the title to Nintendo's Famicom home console. This version had far less floaty movements than its arcade counterpart, but its gameplay was much choppier, which ultimately made it a pretty rough port. After that, a sequel was released in 1989 for the PC Engine exclusively in Japan titled SonSon 2. Surprisingly, it was one of the few PC Engine Capcom games developed completely in-house and fell fully into the platformer genre, being much closer to the original SonSon's initial concept. SonSon has continued to appear regularly in Capcom classic game collections over the years, and even shows up as a playable bonus in titles like Street Fighter VI. In 2005, the arcade game was ported to Japanese mobile phones with one big change. Suisui, one of the allies captured in the opening of the original game, would now be a third fully playable character alongside SonSon and Tonton. The mythical monkey also made plenty of cameo appearances in other Capcom games throughout the years, like Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, Pocket Fighter, Zack and Wiki, Resident Evil 6, and Street Fighter Cross All Capcom. Probably the most famous cameo, though, is in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. SonSon is featured as a fully fleshed out character in the iconic fighting game, complete with a unique moveset of special and super abilities. This SonSon is not the same as the one in Capcom's 1984 video game, however, but instead is presumably the granddaughter of that character, and commonly is referred to as SonSon 3 or SonSon the Third. As Okamoto had been preparing SonSon for its arcade release in the summer of 1984, Fujiwara's team was already hard at work designing Capcom's third video game, though it would be a far cry from the vertical shooter he had previously created.